But what if he decides to send ICE agents or other federal agents to Milwaukee, to Philadelphia, to places around the country at the time of the midterm elections in a way to create an atmosphere of fear that might deter people from showing up at the polls? And here, the idea that we might have to have, you know, plans, contingency plans to protect the voters from the federal government in order to be able to vote. It's just a sad testament to what's happened to our democracy, that that's a serious thing that we have to consider and plan for.
Before we get to audience questions, I've wanted to ask you about President Trump, who's called for culling of voter rolls because he claims that there's been widespread voter fraud, voter ID requirements, including birth certificates and passports for people before they have to vote. Before we get into the individual demands of the president, to what extent does a president have authority over federal elections, versus Congress?
Right. So I mentioned earlier that the Constitution says that Congress can make or alter rules that states use for congressional elections. The president has no role. In fact, back in August, the president passed the president signed an executive order that purported to do certain things related to elections. Now, an executive order is not a law. It's a directive to the executive branch agencies like DOJ, this is what you should do. Department of Homeland Security, this is what you should do. And so he purported to direct an independent U.S. agency that most people have never heard of, called the United States Election Assistance Commission, to make that agency change the form that people can use to register to vote in federal elections to require documentary proof of citizenship, like a passport or a birth certificate and the like. And just this past week, a federal district court ruled and said, you don't have any authority here. The president has no role to play in how elections are run. It was a very strong statement from a very well-respected federal district court judge in Washington, D.C. It was similar to a ruling she issued earlier when she issued a preliminary injunction. And one of the things that was notable here, the Trump administration keeps running to the Supreme Court, trying to get reversals of these preliminary rulings. They didn't go to the Supreme Court on this one, on the preliminary ruling, probably because they know they have no leg to stand on. So Trump is trying to do all kinds of things, say, don't use mail-in balloting. He says he's going to do stuff about voting machines. We don't know exactly what his plans are, like if he's going to issue another executive order. But as the Constitution goes, he has no role to play other than to faithfully execute the laws. And none of what he's trying to do is about executing the laws. They're about his own views about whether mail-in balloting is rife with fraud or his other concerns about rigged elections.
And so you see during the remaining 3.5 years of his term, these executive orders likely to go nowhere because there's just no appetite to follow up on it?
Well, so some of what he did in the executive order, he can do. For example, part of that executive order, which was not challenged in court, says it directs the Department of Justice to go after states like California that allow ballots that are cast by Election Day to arrive after Election Day and be counted. So states have different rules on this. So in Pennsylvania, any mail-in ballot has to arrive by Election Day, but California has a more lenient standard. And there's an argument that's been made, and it was accepted out in a case out of Mississippi by the Fifth Circuit, that federal law requires that the ballots arrive by Election Day. So he's directed Department of Justice to go after states like California and sue them on this. On that separate question on the merits of whether or not ballots that arrive after Election Day be counted, we should know as soon as Monday if the Supreme Court's going to take that Mississippi case and hear that. And I think it's a pretty decent chance they will. But so he can direct DOJ to do that. I'm more concerned about the kind of extra legal things he can do. So first of all, riling up his base and getting people thinking that anytime Democrats win, it's because of fraud. I mean, Trump claimed before the election that Prop 50 was rigged. Like, he never said how this would be. There's no evidence of any kind of tampering of any kind. But what if he decides to send ICE agents or other federal agents to Milwaukee, to Philadelphia, to places around the country at the time of the midterm elections in a way to create an atmosphere of fear that might deter people from showing up at the polls? That's the sort of thing. It's not directly election authority, but it's the kind of thing that potentially the Supreme Court might give him a green light to do. And it could be affecting voting. And, we had this big controversy when Trump said he was going to send election monitors, DOJ sending election monitors to California. So I sent like literally 2 people to Orange County. Like they didn't send an army of people, but there were so many stories. There were a lot of breathless stories. And I tried to like tell the media to calm down. Some of these things are just meant to be a kind of head fake to make people think that there's going to be problems at the polls and deter them from going. That seems to be part of what he's doing.
Hi, I'm Pat Morrison, one of the hosts of America at a Crossroads. If you like this video, don't just watch. Head over to our website where you can subscribe for early access to new programs, see our upcoming schedules, and connect directly with our guests in our weekly live streams. Thank you for watching.
And if in fact this was something that the president embarked on around the midterms, you'd be certain to see all kinds of nonprofits as well as state governments urging people to use mail-in ballots if they're afraid to go to a polling location. And again, as we've seen with California, counter President Trump on election matters. Again, all of these sorts of strategies. There are counter punches that organizations and states have that they can make.
Absolutely. And I advise anyone in a state where you can vote early, either in person or by mail, to do that rather than election day, just because you don't know what kind of interruptions there might be. And, if election day passes and you haven't voted, it's too late. But you're right. The idea, though, that we would have to protect voters against the federal government it's just like we're like living in just a crazy time in American history. I mean, if you think about when federal observers were really used in a positive way, it was during the civil rights era when federal monitors were sent down to Alabama and to other southern states and being asked to register voters because the state and local officials wouldn't register Black voters, and made sure that the polling places were free of violence because mobs were keeping Black voters away. That was this very salutary role of the federal government. I always thought of the federal government as a great protector of voting rights. And here, the idea that we might have to have, contingency plans to protect the voters from the federal government in order to be able to vote, it's just a sad testament to what's happened to our democracy, that's a serious thing that we have to consider and plan for.
I'm going to be back with you next week, along with Janice, Mel, and Zev, as I'll be talking with former CIA officer Stephen Cash. He heads the nonprofit advocacy group, The Steady State. It's made up of former U.S. intelligence veterans who were opposed to President Trump's actions. We'll be with you again. That's 5 o'clock Pacific time. Next Wednesday, right here for America at a Crossroads. Make sure you make your reservation and sign up to join us with the link. Thank you so much. Have a terrific rest of your evening.